The howl of the winter wind carried death on its breath, as Felicity Northcott clutched her newborn child against her chest, each labored exhale forming ghosts in the frigid Wyoming air. The wagon train had left before dawn, her husband's family, deciding her fate with cold calculation after she'd birthed a daughter instead of the son they'd demanded of her womb. Wyoming Territory, 1873. The blizzard had come early that November, catching the settlers of the Northcott wagon train unprepared as they made their final push toward Jackson Hole before winter fully set in. Felicity's teeth chattered uncontrollably as she pulled the thin blanket tighter around her baby girl, born just hours earlier in the back of the wagon that had since disappeared over the ridge. Her body, still weak from childbirth, trembled violently against the base of the pine tree where they'd left her. "Hush now, little one," she whispered to the infant, who miraculously remained silent despite the biting cold. "God will not abandon us, even if they have." But as the snow fell heavier and the daylight began to fade, Felicity found her faith wavering. She had no strength to walk, no provisions, and nowhere to go. Her in-laws had made their decision when they discovered the baby. Was a girl useless to them and their plans for establishing their homestead? Her husband, Emmett, had stood silently by, eyes downcast as his father ordered the wagons to move on without his new wife and daughter. "A woman who bears only daughters is cursed," her father-in-law had spat. "We need strong boys to work the land." Felicity closed her eyes, tears freezing on her cheeks as she began to accept that this frozen wilderness would be their grave. The baby stirred against her chest, somehow finding warmth in her mother's failing body. "I am sorry, my sweet girl," Felicity murmured. "I had such dreams for us." The howl of a wolf in the distance sent a different kind of chill through her veins. Death by freezing or by wild animals, neither fate seemed merciful. She tried to move to find some hidden reserve of strength, but her legs refused to respond. The blood loss from childbirth and the punishing cold had taken too great a toll. As consciousness began to slip away from her like water through cupped hands, Felicity thought she heard the rhythmic crunch of hooves on snow. Her mind, she decided, was offering one final comfort before the end, the illusion of rescue. But the sound grew louder, more defined. And then a shadow fell across her face, blocking the few remaining rays of the setting sun. "Sweet Jesus," a deep voice exclaimed. "What in God's name?" Through half-frozen eyelashes, Felicity made out the silhouette of a man against the darkening sky. Tall, broad-shouldered, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat and a bandana pulled up against the cold. "Help," she managed to whisper, the word barely audible over the wind. "My baby." The stranger dismounted in a swift, fluid motion, kneeling beside her in the snow. Warm, gloved hands carefully pulled back the edge of her blanket, revealing the tiny face of her daughter. "You're alive," he said, surprise and something like awe in his voice. "Both of you." Xavier Jackson had been tracking a herd of elk when the storm hit. Intending to bring back meat to the small ranch he'd been building over the past 2 years. At 32, he had long ago resigned himself to a solitary life, finding companionship only in his horses and the occasional visits to the nearest town, some 20 miles south. "Can't leave you out here," he said, more to himself than to her. "Madam, I'm going to have to move you." "My cabin's not far." Felicity nodded weakly, unable to speak any more. She felt strong arms slide beneath her, lifting both her and the baby with surprising gentleness. The pain of movement nearly caused her to black out. "Stay with me now," the stranger urged, his voice firm but kind. "What's your name, madam?" "Felicity," she managed through cracked lips. "Felicity Northcott, and this is my daughter." She has no name yet." Xavier settled her carefully on his horse, then mounted behind her, one arm securely around her waist while the other held the reins. "Xavier Jackson," he replied. "Most folks call me Zav. You hold tight to that little one, Mrs. Northcott. We'll have you warm soon enough." The journey to Xavier's cabin passed in a blur for Felicity. She drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the steady heartbeat of the man at her back and the precious weight of her baby against her chest. When they finally arrived, night had fully descended, and the blizzard raged with unchecked fury. Xavier's cabin stood alone in a small clearing, smoke still rising from the chimney, a testament to the fire he'd left burning before his hunt. Inside, the single-room structure was spare but warm. A bed occupied one corner, a small table and 2 chairs another. A cast-iron stove radiated blessed heat, and shelves lined with provisions spoke of careful preparation for the winter months. Xavier settled Felicity on his bed, then stoked the fire until the cabin grew almost uncomfortably warm. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said matter-of-factly, turning his back to offer privacy. "I'll hold the little one while you change." Felicity hesitated, then carefully handed over her daughter. "I don't know if I can. My strength." Xavier nodded in understanding. "I'll step outside for a moment. There's a shirt and pants on the hook there. They'll be too big, but they're dry. Call when you're ready for me to take the baby again." He waited outside, sheltered by the small porch, cradling the infant with unexpected skill. When Felicity called weakly, he returned to find her dressed in his clothes, her wet garments piled on the floor. "You've held babies before," she observed as he handed the child back to her. "My sister had 4 before she passed," he replied simply. "You need food and then rest. I'll make some broth." As Xavier moved about the cabin, preparing a simple meal, Felicity studied him. Tall and lean, with dark hair that brushed his collar and a beard that couldn't quite hide the strong line of his jaw. His eyes, when they met hers, were a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin. "Your husband," Xavier said as he placed a steaming mug of broth in her hands. "Where is he?" Felicity's eyes filled with tears. "With his family. They left us behind." Xavier's expression darkened. "Left you, in a blizzard, after childbirth. They wanted a boy," she whispered. "The baby was supposed to be a boy." The fury that crossed Xavier's face was swift and terrible. He turned away, visibly struggling to control his anger. "No man worthy of the name would do such a thing," he finally said, his voice low and controlled. "You and your daughter are welcome here until you're strong enough to decide what you want to do." That night, Xavier slept on a bedroll near the stove, giving Felicity and the baby his bed. She woke several times to feed the infant, and each time found him awake, adding wood to the fire or simply sitting quietly, watching over them. By morning, the blizzard had subsided, leaving the world outside buried under 3 feet of pristine snow. Xavier prepared a breakfast of cornmeal mush sweetened with molasses and brought it to Felicity in bed. "The little one needs a name," he said as he watched Felicity feed her daughter. "Unless you're waiting for her father to return." Felicity's face hardened. "He won't be returning. And neither will I to him." She looked down at the baby's face. "I think I'll call her Hope, because she gave me a reason to keep fighting when I wanted to give up." Xavier nodded approvingly. "Hope, it suits her." Over the next few days, Felicity regained her strength slowly. Xavier proved to be a surprisingly gentle caretaker, heating water for her to bathe, preparing simple but nourishing meals, and even fashioning a crude cradle for Hope from a wooden crate and some furs. "You never told me what brought you out here alone," Felicity said one evening as they sat by the fire, Hope sleeping peacefully in her makeshift bed. Xavier was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the dancing flames. "The war changed me," he finally said. "I came back from fighting for the Union to find my fiancée had married my cousin. My parents had died from influenza. There wasn't much left for me back east." "I'm sorry," Felicity said softly. He shrugged. "It was a long time ago now, almost 8 years since Appomattox." He glanced at her. "What about you? How'd you end up with a man who could leave you to die?" Felicity sighed. "My father died last spring. The farm was failing. Emmett Northcott seemed like salvation when he came courting handsome from a well-established family heading west." She gave a bitter laugh. "I was with child before we reached the Wyoming border. His parents made it clear they expected a grandson when Hope arrived instead." "They left you to die," Xavier finished, his expression grim. "Where were they headed?" "Jackson Hole. Emmett's father bought land there sight unseen." Xavier nodded thoughtfully. "Once the pass is clear in spring, I could take you to Fort Bridger. There's a settlement there, women who might help you start over." The thought should have been comforting, but Felicity found herself strangely reluctant to consider it. In just a few days, this cabin had begun to feel like safety, like home. "I don't know what I'll do when spring comes," she admitted. "For now, I'm just grateful to be alive, to have hope alive." As the days turned into weeks, life settled into a rhythm. Xavier would hunt during the brief daylight hours, returning with rabbits or the occasional deer. Felicity took over the cooking and mending, finding purpose in the simple domestic tasks. Hope thrived, growing stronger each day, her cries becoming more demanding, more alive. December brought Christmas, and with it, a rare clear day. Xavier disappeared early in the morning, returning hours later with a small pine tree which he set up in the corner of the cabin. "It ain't much," he said, looking almost embarrassed. "But my ma always said no child should have Christmas without a tree." That night, they decorated it with strings of dried berries and carved wooden stars Xavier produced from a trunk under his bed. "I made these years ago," he explained. "Never had cause to use them before." Felicity watched him hang the last star, his strong hands surprisingly delicate in their movements. "Why did you help us?" she asked suddenly. "You could have left us there." Xavier turned to her, his blue eyes serious. "What kind of man would I be if I rode past a woman and child freezing to death?" "Many men would have," she said softly. "My husband did." Xavier moved closer, his hand reaching out to gently touch Hope's head where she lay sleeping in Felicity's arms. "Then he was never worthy of either of you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Something shifted between them that night, a seed of possibility planted in the frozen ground of winter, waiting for the thaw. January brought the coldest days Felicity had ever experienced. The temperature dropped so low that the moisture in their breath froze instantly upon the window glass. They spent long evenings by the fire, Xavier teaching Felicity to play checkers with pieces carved from firewood, talking of their lives before. She learned he had fought at Gettysburg, had seen things no man should see. He learned she had once dreamed of becoming a schoolteacher before her father's illness changed everything. "You still could," he said one night as they sat side by side, Hope sleeping between them on the bed. "Teach, I mean. This territory needs educated women." "Perhaps," she replied, her fingers absently stroking Hope's downy head. "But first I need to ensure we survive." "You'll survive," Xavier said with quiet conviction. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known." Felicity looked up, startled by the admiration in his voice. "I'm not strong. I made a terrible choice in Emmett." "You survived childbirth alone in a blizzard," he countered. "You're still here. That's strength." Their eyes held for a moment too long, and Felicity felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. February brought an unexpected visitor, a trader named Wilkins. who occasionally brought supplies to the isolated homesteaders in the area. He arrived on a sled pulled by 4 dogs, his face nearly hidden behind a massive fur hood. "Jackson," he called as Xavier opened the door, "thought you might be needing supplies by now." His eyes widened when he spotted Felicity inside with hope. "Well now, didn't know you had company for the winter." Xavier explained the situation briefly, his tone making it clear he wouldn't tolerate any crude speculation. Wilkins, to his credit, showed only outrage at Felicity's abandonment. "Them Northcotts," he spat. "Heard tell they made it to Jackson Hole before the worst storms hit. Old man's been throwing his weight around, talking big about the ranch he's gonna build." He glanced at Felicity. No mention of a daughter-in-law or grandbaby, though. Felicity felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. "They probably told everyone I died in childbirth." Wilkins stayed only long enough to trade his goods for the furs Xavier had accumulated. Before leaving, he promised to return in early spring with more supplies. "And maybe news," he added with a significant look at Felicity. "Folks should know what kind of men the Northcotts really are." After he left, a heavy silence fell over the cabin. The reminder of the outside world of Emmett and his family had broken the fragile peace they'd established. "I should have killed him," Xavier said suddenly, his voice tight with anger. "If I ever meet your husband, he's not my husband anymore," Felicity interrupted. "Not in my heart. He forfeited that right when he left us to die." Xavier's eyes softened. "The law might see it differently." "The law didn't save us," she said simply. "You did." That night, as a fresh snowstorm raged outside, something changed again. Xavier sat beside her on the bed, carefully keeping space between them, but his presence felt different, charged with unspoken feelings. "Felicity," he began, then stopped, struggling for words. "Yes," she prompted, her heart suddenly racing. "I know it's too soon. I know you're still healing. But I need you to know that when spring comes, I don't want you to go." The words came out in a rush. "Unless you want to, of course. You're free to choose your path. But these past weeks have been the happiest of my life," she finished for him, surprising herself with the truth of it. Despite everything. His hand found hers atop the quilt, his calloused fingers entwining with her smaller ones. "I never expected to find anyone out here. Never thought I'd want to again after Ellen left. I never expected to find a good man," Felicity whispered. "I had stopped believing they existed." Xavier leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his lips met hers in a kiss so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. It held none of the entitled demand she'd known from Emmett, only a question, a hope. When they parted, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I'm not asking for anything now. Just that you consider staying when the time comes." Felicity nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. That night, Xavier still slept on his bedroll, but something fundamental had changed. A future had begun to take shape in the frozen wilderness. March brought the first signs of thaw-dripping icicles and patches of exposed earth where the sun hit strongest. Hope was growing rapidly, her face filling out, her eyes blue like her mother's, tracking movement with increasing awareness. One unexpectedly warm afternoon, Xavier took Felicity outside for the first time since her rescue. Supporting her with a strong arm around her waist, he showed her the boundaries of his small ranch, the corral where his 3 horses stood, their winter coats shaggy and thick, the half-built barn he'd been working on before the snows came, the creek that ran along the eastern edge of the property, now beginning to break free from its icy prison. "It's not much," he admitted, "but the soil's good. Come summer we could plant a proper garden, maybe build on to the cabin." He hesitated. "If you were to stay." Felicity looked around at the small homestead, seeing not what it was but what it could become. A home. a safe place for hope to grow. "I'd need my own room," she said thoughtfully. "Hope will need space as she gets older." Xavier's face broke into a wide grin. "I can build rooms, as many as you want." Their eyes met, and Felicity felt something unfurl inside her, a cautious joy, a tentative reaching toward happiness. But reality intruded the following week when Wilkins returned, his dog sled loaded with spring supplies and, more ominously, news. "Emmett Northcott's been telling folks in Jackson Hole that his wife ran off with another man during the journey west," he reported grimly. "Says she abandoned him and their unborn child," his pa's backing the story, saying they searched for days. Felicity's hands trembled so badly that Xavier gently took Hope from her arms. "They're painting me as the villain," she said in disbelief, "after they left us to die." Xavier's expression was thunderous. "No one who meets you would believe such lies. But they haven't met me," she pointed out, "and most would take a man's word over a woman's regardless." Wilkins cleared his throat uncomfortably. "There's more. Word is the Northcotts are offering a reward for information about your whereabouts, claiming they want to reunite the family." "They want Hope," Felicity realized with sudden clarity. "Emmett's their only son. Hope is their only grandchild. They want to take her and erase me." The fear that gripped her was primal, instinctual, a mother ready to fight to the death for her child. "No one knows you're here except me," Wilkins assured her, "and I ain't telling." After the trader left, Xavier and Felicity sat in troubled silence. The idyllic bubble of their winter isolation had been punctured by the harsh realities of the world beyond. "We could leave," Xavier finally suggested. "Go further west, California maybe. Start fresh where no one knows the Northcott name." Felicity stared into the fire, weighing their options. "And abandon everything you've built here. Your land, your home. Land can be claimed anywhere," he said firmly. "Home is where you and Hope are safe." The simple declaration brought tears to her eyes. "You would do that, for us?" Xavier knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Felicity, I've lived enough to recognize what matters. It isn't land or buildings." His eyes, intense and sincere, held hers. "I love you, both of you. I think I have since that first night watching you fight to keep your baby alive. Love." The word hung in the air between them, fragile and powerful. "I love you too," she whispered, the admission both frightening and freeing. "But I won't run. I won't let them make me a fugitive when I've done nothing wrong." Xavier nodded slowly, respect mingling with concern in his expression. "Then we fight, but we do it smart." The plan they formed was bold in its simplicity. With the mountain passes clearing, Xavier would ride to Fort Bridger and speak with the territorial judge stationed there. He would bring back a legal representative to document Felicity's abandonment and, if possible, to begin divorce proceedings. "The Northcotts won't stop," Felicity warned as she helped him pack for the journey. "They're powerful, wealthy. So are others who would side with a mother protecting her child," Xavier countered. "The judge at Fort Bridger, Judge Atkins, is a fair man. He'll hear your case." The morning of his departure dawned clear and cold. Felicity stood in the doorway of the cabin, Hope bundled against her chest, watching Xavier saddle his strongest horse. 3 days to Fort Bridger," he said, checking the cinch one final time. "Maybe 5 to return, depending on who comes back with me. You have enough provisions." Felicity nodded, trying to ignore the fear clawing at her throat. The idea of being alone again, even temporarily, terrified her more than she wanted to admit. Xavier sensed her anxiety and pulled her into his arms, careful not to crush Hope between them. "I will come back," he promised fiercely. "Nothing will stop me." "I know," she whispered against his chest. "Be safe." Their parting kiss was different from the gentle explorations they'd shared over the past weeks, deeper, more urgent, laden with all the words they hadn't yet said. Then he was gone, the sound of hoofbeats fading as he rode south toward Fort Bridger. Felicity returned to the cabin and bolted the door, Xavier's rifle loaded and within reach, just as they had agreed. The first 2 days passed without incident. Felicity maintained their routine, caring for Hope, tending the fire, preparing simple meals. She even ventured out to feed the remaining horses, always with the rifle slung across her back. On the 3rd day, as dusk approached, she heard the unmistakable sound of approaching riders. Too soon for it to be Xavier. Too many horses for it to be Wilkins. Felicity's blood ran cold. She quickly extinguished the lamps, leaving only the dim glow of the banked fire. With shaking hands, she placed Hope in her cradle, covering it with a blanket to muffle any sounds the baby might make. Then she took up position near the window, Xavier's rifle in her hands. 3 riders emerged from the tree line. Even in the fading light, she recognized the lead figure immediately, Emmett, his posture stiff and entitled as always. Behind him rode his father, Harrison Northcott, and another man she didn't recognize. They dismounted at the edge of the clearing, approaching the cabin with the confidence of men who believed themselves beyond reproach. "Smoke from the chimney," Harrison observed loudly. "Someone's home." Emmett stepped forward. "Hello, the house," he called. "We're looking for Xavier Jackson." Felicity remained silent, her finger resting lightly on the rifle's trigger. They knew Xavier's name. "How? We know he took something that belongs to us," Harrison continued when no answer came. "A woman and a child. My son's wife and daughter." Felicity's hands began to tremble with rage. "Belongs to us." As if she and Hope were property, cattle to be claimed. "We just want to talk," Emmett called, his voice taking on the wheedling tone she knew preceded his worst behaviors. "Felicity, if you're in there, your family wants you back." The 3rd man stepped forward. "Madam, I'm Sheriff Daniels from Jackson Hole. There's no need for this to get ugly. Just come on out and we can sort this whole misunderstanding." A sheriff. They'd brought the law. Felicity's mind raced. What could she do against 3 men, one of them an officer of the law? If she fired the rifle, she'd be branded a murderer. If she surrendered, they would take Hope. As if sensing her mother's distress, Hope began to whimper beneath the blanket. The sound, though muffled, carried in the still evening air. "The baby's inside," Harrison said sharply. "Emmett, get that door open." "Now hold on," the sheriff cautioned. "We do this legal-like." "That's my child in there," Emmett protested. "And my wife who ran off with another man." "What more legal right do I need?" The sheriff hesitated, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to stand against the influential Northcotts. "Let me try first," he said finally. "Madam, I'm coming to the door to talk. Just talk." Felicity backed away from the window, her mind made up. She wouldn't shoot, but neither would she surrender. When the sheriff knocked, she called out in a clear, steady voice, "I have a loaded rifle. I will use it to protect my child." There was a moment of stunned silence from outside, then Emmett's angry voice. "Felicity, stop this nonsense and open the door. You left us to die," she called back, her voice breaking. "In a blizzard, after I gave birth. You rode away and left your daughter and me to freeze to death." "That's a lie," Harrison bellowed. "Sheriff, she's clearly deranged." "Childbirth affected her mind. Mr. Jackson found us," Felicity continued, addressing the sheriff directly. "He saved our lives when my husband abandoned us. I am not leaving this cabin and you are not taking my daughter." The standoff continued as full darkness descended. Felicity could hear the men arguing in hushed voices, the sheriff clearly growing more uncertain as the conflicting stories weighed on him. Hope began to cry in earnest, hungry and disturbed by the tension. Felicity moved to the cradle, keeping the rifle within reach as she lifted her daughter to nurse. "It's all right, little one," she murmured. "Your mother is here. I won't let them take you." Outside, the argument grew louder. Harrison was insisting they break down the door, while the sheriff advocated waiting until morning. Emmett's voice rose petulantly, demanding his rights as a husband. Then, cutting through their angry words, came the thundering of approaching hooves, not one horse but several, moving at speed. "Riders coming," the sheriff called, his hand moving to his gun. Felicity's heart leapt. Could it be Xavier, returning already? But he wouldn't be traveling with others at such speed. The newcomers burst into the clearing, 4 men on horseback, rifles drawn. At their head rode Xavier, his face set in grim determination. Beside him, to Felicity's astonishment, was a distinguished older man wearing the formal attire of a judge, and behind them, 2 U.S. Marshals in uniform. "Harrison and Emmett Northcott," the older man called out, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "I am Judge Atkins of the Wyoming Territorial Court. You are hereby ordered to stand down and step away from that cabin." The sheriff's hand fell away from his gun. "Judge Atkins." "What's this about?" "This is about attempted kidnapping and perjury," the judge replied coldly. "And possibly attempted murder, if what Mr. Jackson has told me proves true." Xavier dismounted, his eyes finding the cabin window where Felicity stood watching. The relief on his face when he saw her was palpable, even across the distance. "The woman in that cabin is under the protection of this court," Judge Atkins continued, "as is her infant child. Mr. Jackson brought sworn testimony from a trader named Wilkins who found the abandoned woman's traveling trunk still in the Northcott wagon, proof they left with her possessions after abandoning her." The sheriff turned to Harrison and Emmett, his expression hardening. "Is this true?" "You left a woman and newborn to die. The baby was a girl," Harrison spat, his true nature finally revealed. "Useless to us. And her mother was weak, sickly after the birth. They would have slowed us down." The confession, so casually cruel, shocked even the sheriff into silence. "Arrest them," Judge Atkins ordered the marshals. "All charges to be formalized at Fort Bridger." As the Northcotts were restrained, protesting furiously, Xavier rushed to the cabin door. "Felicity, it's me. It's over. You're safe now." She unbolted the door with trembling hands, and then she was in his arms, hope cradled between them, all 3 of them whole and together. "How did you return so quickly?" "With a judge?" she asked, breathless with relief. "Providence," Xavier replied. "The judge was already on circuit, staying at Fort Bridger when I arrived. When he heard your story, he insisted on coming immediately." His arms tightened around her. "I was so afraid we'd be too late." Judge Atkins approached the cabin, his expression softening at the sight of Felicity and hope. "Mrs. Northcott, I presume?" "Yes, Your Honor," she replied, straightening her spine. "Though I hope not to carry that name much longer." The judge nodded solemnly. "Given the circumstances and the testimony we've gathered, I believe we can arrange for the most expeditious divorce proceedings the territory has ever seen." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "And perhaps, when appropriate, a new marriage certificate might be in order." Xavier's arm around her waist tightened slightly, but he said nothing, letting the choice be hers. Felicity looked up at him, this man who had saved not just her life and her daughter's, but her faith in human goodness. "Yes," she said simply, "when the time is right." They were married the following June, after the divorce was granted and the Northcotts had been convicted of attempted murder and abandonment. The ceremony took place outside Xavier's cabin, now expanded to include 2 new rooms and a proper porch. Judge Atkins returned to perform the service, bringing with him gifts from the women of Fort Bridger who had been moved by Felicity's story. Wilkins came too, his normally gruff demeanor softened by the occasion. Hope, now 7 months old and thriving, was dressed in a gown made from one of Xavier's old shirts, a symbol of how he had sheltered and protected them both. "I never expected to find love in a blizzard," Felicity said as they stood together before the judge. "But sometimes salvation comes in unexpected forms." Xavier took her hands in his blue eyes shining with a happiness he had long ago stopped hoping for. "You saved me as much as I saved you," he replied. "You and Hope gave me back a future I thought was lost." Judge Atkins smiled at the couple before him. "By the power vested in me by the Wyoming Territory, I now pronounce you husband and wife." He winked at Xavier. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Jackson." As their lips met, sealing their vows and their future, Hope cooed happily in Wilkins's awkward hold. The sound, joyful and alive, was the perfect blessing for a union born in the harshest winter, but destined to thrive through all seasons to come. In the years that followed, the Jackson Ranch prospered. Hope grew into a spirited girl with her mother's determination and her adoptive father's kind heart. She was joined by two brothers, William, born a year after the wedding, and Thomas, 2 years after that. Felicity eventually realized her dream of teaching, establishing a small school on their property for Hope and the children of neighboring homesteaders. Xavier built it for her with the same care he had put into expanding their home plank by plank, nail by nail, a physical manifestation of his unwavering support. The Northcotts served their sentences and left Wyoming Territory, never to return. Their shame followed them, the story of their cruelty passing into local legend as a cautionary tale. And on cold winter nights, when the wind howled outside their sturdy home, Xavier and Felicity would tell their children the story of how they found each other, a story of abandonment transformed into belonging, of a near death that led to a life more joyful than either could have imagined. "Sometimes," Felicity would say, watching her family gathered around the fire, "what seems like your darkest hour is just the beginning of your greatest blessing." Xavier would always reach for her hand then, his eyes reflecting the same gratitude that filled her heart for the blizzard that nearly took everything, and for the love that gave them so much more in return.